My grandfather had the cleanest garden in the whole holler, and I never one time saw that man out there fighting weeds. No hoe going all day long, no aching back bent over the rows, and I promise you he never once bought a jug of poison to spray on the ground his food grew in. His rows were clean as a whistle from spring clear through to frost, and the neighbors could never figure out how an old man did it so easy. Well, tonight I am going to tell you exactly how he did it, every bit of it, and once you hear it, you are going to wonder why nobody ever told you before. Because here is the truth of the thing. If you are out there on your hands and knees pulling weeds every weekend, and they just keep coming back thicker than before, it is not because you are lazy, and it is not because you are doing something wrong. It is because you were never taught the old way. Somewhere along the line, folks got talked into believing that the only way to beat a weed is to fight it one at a time, or to spray something on it out of a bottle. And both of those are the hardest, the slowest, and the most expensive ways there ever was, and neither one of them ever really wins. So pull up a chair and let me show you how the old timers kept their gardens clean without any chemicals, without breaking their backs, and without spending a single dime. Now, before we get into the ways, I want to give you the one idea that everything else hangs on. Because once this clicks for you, the whole business of weeding is going to look different for the rest of your life. Here it is. You do not pull a weed. You starve it. Every weed that ever grew has got to have two things to win, and only two. It has got to have light, and it has got to be allowed to make seed. That is all. Take away its light, and it cannot grow. Take away its chance to go to seed, and it cannot ever come back next year. So my grandfather never once thought about killing weeds one at a time. He thought about taking away their light and stopping their seed. And when you do those two things together, the weeds do not come back thicker the way they do when you fight them. They come back less and less and less until one day you look out at your garden and there is hardly a weed to be found anywhere. That is the whole secret. And everything I am about to tell you tonight is just a different way of doing those same two things, light and seed. Keep those two words in your head. All right? Let us start with the big one, the one that does more good than all the rest of them put together. The first old way is to smother them. My grandfather covered every single inch of bare dirt in that garden with a thick blanket of mulch, because bare dirt is the one and only place a weed can ever get started. Think about it for a minute. A weed seed is laying there in the soil waiting for a little touch of sunlight to reach it so it knows it is time to wake up and sprout. If you cover that ground so no light ever touches the dirt, that seed just rolls over and goes back to sleep. So he laid down straw 3 or 4 inches thick, all up and down the rows and all around every plant. Old spoiled hay, grass clippings dried out in the sun, leaves he raked and saved from the fall before, wood chips on the paths, whatever he had that year. And wherever that mulch was good and thick, no weed ever came up. Not one. And the mulch did him 2 more favors. Besides, it held the moisture down in the ground, so he watered half as much as his neighbors. And it slowly rotted down and fed the soil richer every year. 1 armful of straw, 3 blessings. If you do nothing else, I tell you tonight, you do this one thing. Because a thick mulch is the closest thing there is in this world to a weed-proof garden. The second old way, and this was my grandmother's rule, the one she said over and over until it was burned into my head as a boy, is to never let a single weed go to seed. Never. There is an old saying, and it is as true as anything ever spoken. 1 year of seeding makes 7 years of weeding. Now what that means is this. A single pigweed or a single lamb's quarter, if you let it grow all the way up and flower and drop its seed, will throw 100,000 seeds into your soil. And those seeds will lay down in there and come up a few at a time for 7 years or more. So 1 weed you let go today is 7 years of misery you just signed yourself up for. My grandfather could not walk past a weed with a flower on it. If he saw one out there fixing to go to seed, he would snap the head right off of it before it ever got the chance, even if he did not have time right then to pull up the whole plant, take the head, stop the seed. You do that faithful for one single season, and the very next year there is a fraction of the weeds there used to be because you shut the supply line right off. The third old way is how the old timers used a hoe, and it is nothing at all like how most folks use one today. Most folks wait until the weeds are big and tall, then go out and chop and dig and turn all the soil up trying to kill them. And that, friends, is exactly backwards, and here is why. Every time you dig deep and turn that soil over, you drag a whole fresh batch of weed seeds up from down below, up to where the light can finally reach them, and you have just gone and planted next week's weeds with your own two hands. So my grandfather did the very opposite. He hoed shallow, he hoed early, and he hoed in the heat of the day. He had a little scuffle hoe, sharp as a blade, and he would just barely scrape the top half-inch of the soil, slicing off the tiny weed seedlings right when they first showed themselves, when they were no bigger around than a thread. And he did it on a hot, dry, sunny afternoon on purpose because those little cut-off seedlings would lay right there on top of the dry ground and the sun would bake them dead before supper time. Scrape shallow, catch them small, do it in the sun. 2 minutes of that once a week beats 2 hours of hard digging, and it does not wake up all that buried seed the way deep digging does. The fourth old way I have got to tell you about because it is one almost nobody does anymore, and it is pure gold. The old timers called it a stale seedbed, and it is the sneakiest trick in the whole book. Here is how it goes. Say you are fixing to plant a new row. Instead of planting it the same day you work the ground, my grandfather would work the bed up nice and smooth, and then he would just walk away and leave it alone for a week or two. And in that week or two, all the weed seeds sitting near the top of that fresh soil would sprout up in a big green flush. Then he would come along with that shallow hoe on a sunny day and scrape the whole flush of little weeds off dead without disturbing the soil hardly at all. And then, into that clean ground, he planted his crop. What he had done was trick all the weeds into coming up early so he could kill them all at once, before his vegetables were even in the ground. His seeds came up into soil where the competition was already dead and gone. That one trick, letting the weeds come up first so you can wipe them out before you plant, will give you the cleanest rows you ever grew. The fifth old way is for the tough ones, the weeds that keep coming back from the root no matter how many times you cut the top off. Your dandelions, your dock, your thistle, and worst of all, your bindweed, that creeping vine that wraps around everything you love. With those, cutting the top off does no lasting good at all, because the whole life of the plant is stored down deep in that root, and it will just send up another top and another. So for those, you have got to get the root, the whole root, all the way down. My grandfather had an old forked tool, what some folks call a dandelion fork, and he would drive it down alongside the root and lever the entire thing up out of the ground, deep as it went. And now hear me close on the bindweed especially, because this is important. Do not ever take a tiller or a hoe and chop that bindweed up, because every little piece of root you chop into becomes a brand new plant, and you will make 10 of them where you had one. That kind you either smother in the dark or you dig out whole, but you never, ever chop it. The sixth old way is the very easiest one there is, and it costs you nothing at all but a little bit of timing. Pull your weeds the morning after a good rain. When that ground is soft and soaked through, a weed will slide right out of it, root and all. Easy as pulling a fork out of a warm cake. But when the ground is dry and baked hard, you pull and the top snaps off in your hand, and the whole root stays down in there and grows right back within the week. So my grandmother never once wasted a dry day fighting weeds. She would wait for rain, go out the next morning while the ground was still soft and giving, and those weeds would practically hand themselves up to her. The same weeds in the same garden for a tenth of the work, and the whole difference is nothing but timing. Wet ground, whole root. Dry ground, wasted effort. The seventh old way is for the paths and the driveway and the cracks in the walk, all those places outside the garden beds where you just want the weeds gone for good and nothing you care about is growing there anyhow. For those, my grandfather kept an old kettle by the door. Boiling water, poured straight onto a weed growing up in a crack, kills it dead right on the spot, root and all, and it costs you nothing but the water you already had hot. For a bigger job, the old-timers would mix up plain white vinegar with a good handful of salt and just a squirt of dish soap to make it stick, and paint it right onto the weeds in the gravel on a hot sunny day. And by the next morning, they would be brown and dead. Now, you hear me close on this one. This is important. That vinegar and salt mix will kill anything green it touches, and that salt stays down in the ground a long time after. So you never, ever use that mix in a garden bed where you mean to grow something. That is for the driveway and the cracks and the fence line only. In the garden, it is mulch and the hoe. On the path, it is boiling water and vinegar. Keep those two worlds separate. The eighth old way is the one for when you have got a patch that has gone completely to jungle, or when you want to start a brand new bed in an old weedy corner of the yard. You do not dig it, you do not till it, and you do not stand there and fight it weed by weed. You smother the whole thing to death at once. My grandfather would lay flattened cardboard boxes or a good thick layer of newspaper right over the entire patch, weeds and all, wet it all down good with the hose, and then pile mulch or old hay or even just plain dirt on top of it. And then he would walk away and leave it be for a few weeks, or better yet, for a whole season. And under there in the pitch dark, every weed and every seed dies for lack of light, and the cardboard rots down and feeds the earthworms while it works. When he finally pulled that mulch back, the ground underneath was soft and black and clean and ready to plant. And he never turned over one single shovelful of soil to get it that way. The old-timers understood that the same sun that grows your garden is the very same sun that grows your weeds. So if you want to kill a whole patch of weeds at once, you just take the sun away from them. Cover it and wait. Time does the work. The ninth old way is about not giving the weeds any room to move in to begin with. See, a weed is an opportunist, plain and simple. It moves into bare, empty, open ground where nothing else is using the light. So my grandfather almost never left the ground bare and open if he could help it. He planted his rows close together, close enough that the leaves of his good plants grew up and out and shaded the bare ground in between them. And once his crop filled in and closed over, there was no sunlight left down at the soil for any weed to use. And in the spots that would have otherwise sat empty and open, he would sow what the old folks called a cover crop, something quick like buckwheat or a patch of clover, just to hold that ground and blanket it green until he was ready to plant something he wanted there. So think of it this way. If your good plants are not using that ground and that sunlight, then a weed most surely will. So fill it up, close spacing, cover crops, a living green blanket of something you chose, so there is simply no room and no light left over for something you did not. The 10th old way is about not feeding your own enemy, and most folks do it without ever knowing. See, when you stand out there with a hose and sprinkle water all over the whole bed, or when you scatter fertilizer broadcast across the top of the soil, you are not just feeding and watering your tomatoes. You are feeding and watering every single weed seed in that ground, right along with them. So my grandfather watered right down at the base of his plants, at the roots, where his crop could drink it, and the bare dirt in between stayed thirsty and dry and unfriendly to a sprouting weed. And when he fed his plants, he fed them right at the stem, not broadcast all across the whole patch. Feed your plant, not your dirt. And there is one more piece to this that folks get wrong all the time. Never haul in fresh manure or a load of half-rotted compost that is full of live weed seed and spread it on your garden, because you will be sowing a bumper crop of weeds with every forkful. A good hot compost pile, one that really cooks and gets to steaming in the middle, will kill all those weed seeds dead before you ever spread it. Cold and seedy compost plants weeds. Hot compost kills them. Know the difference. Now, the 11th old way is not really a trick at all. It is a habit, and it is the one habit that ties every other thing together and separates a clean garden from a weedy one. You stay on top of it. My grandfather never once weeded his garden in one big miserable all-day battle every few weeks the way folks do now. He walked those rows for a few minutes nearly every single evening, and he pulled the 2 or 3 little weeds he happened to see while they were still tiny, long before they ever got a foothold. Because a weed you catch the very day it sprouts comes up between 2 fingers, easy. That same exact weed a month later takes a shovel and a grunt and a sore back. So weeding was never a dreaded chore for that man. It was just a little evening stroll through the garden with his cup of coffee, pulling a weed here and a weed there, keeping a nice clean edge cut around the beds, catching every last one of them while it was small. And if a patch ever did get away from him, well, he would just turn the chickens loose on it and let them scratch it right down to bare clean dirt for him and get a mess of eggs out of the bargain. A little every day, catch them small, and let the animals lend a hand. That is not hard work at all. That is just paying attention. Now, before I let you go, I want to tell you one more thing that the old timers knew that we have plain forgotten, and it will change how you even look at a weed. Not every weed is your enemy. Some of the very weeds you have been fighting are food, and good food at that. That lamb's quarter is better than any spinach you ever grew. Those dandelion greens your grandmother picked in the spring were medicine. That purslane is full of good oil, and the old folks ate it gladly. And more than that, the weeds will actually talk to you if you learn to listen. A patch of dandelions with those long, deep roots is telling you your soil is packed hard down below. A stand of thistle or dock is telling you something about the ground it chose. The old timers read their weeds like a letter from the soil. So do not just hate every weed. Some of them are supper, and all of them are telling you something. So let me tie it all back together for you before you head off. Everything I told you tonight, every last bit of it, comes back to those 2 words from the very beginning: light and seed. Smothering with mulch, covering with cardboard, planting close and thick, that is all just taking away their light. Snapping off the seed heads, hot composting, the stale seed bed, hoeing them off before they ever flower, that is all just stopping their seed. Take away the light, stop the seed, and the weeds lose every time. It is that simple, and it always was that simple. Now, if you do just one single thing this week, do this. Go out and lay down a good thick blanket of mulch on every bit of bare dirt in that garden, 3 or 4 inches deep, right up around all your plants. That one move alone will stop more weeds than a whole summer of pulling ever could, and it will do it while you sit up on the porch and rest. And while you're out there laying it down, keep an eye out for any weed that is fixing to flower and go to seed, and snap that head off before it gets the chance. Those 2 things this week, and I promise you, come next spring, you will see the difference with your own 2 eyes. None of this is hard, and not one single bit of it cost you money. It is just the way it was always done back before somebody decided we all needed a jug of poison and an aching back just to grow a little bit of our own food. The old timers kept the cleanest gardens you ever laid eyes on with nothing but a little straw, a sharp hoe, and a habit of paying attention. And now, so can you. So tell me down in the comments, What did your people do to keep the weeds down back before all the sprays and the store-bought chemicals came along? Did your grandmother have a trick I did not mention here tonight? I read every single comment, and I learn something new from you good folks every week of my life. And if this helped you any at all, and I surely hope it did, do me a kindness and subscribe and sit a while with us here at the Old Mountain Way, because we are keeping these old ways alive one at a time, and there will always be a place for you at this table. You take care of yourself now, and I will see you next time.